ill people that are not being served. So.
We want to feel safe, and I think that's probably where our support of the military, pardon the expression, military-industrial complex, it makes us feel safe. But the safety that we feel, I think, is really related to that question that was asked of Jesus, who is my neighbor? What keeps my neighbor safe? My neighbor can't be safe if my neighbor's stomach is growling, or if my neighbor in another nation is starving.
And what does it mean to love your enemy?
Yeah.
I mean, if Jesus was really,
if he was serious about that,
and we are serious followers of Jesus, that becomes a very vital thing. I remember a family in Millerton, New York. My parents were friends of them, and he was a young man that we knew. He was a little older than I, but the first man to die in the Korean War. When a young life, you come home, and then you realize that there were many mothers all over the world experiencing the death of loved ones. Even though we call them enemies, they still are God's children.
Yeah. Let me reintroduce you both to our audience so that people know who we're talking to. Reverend Fred Brooks, a retired United Methodist pastor, and you served most recently in Ithaca. Is that right?
Yes, I was retired that time, and my bishop in Oregon, where I am a member of the Oregon Idaho Andrew Conference, and the bishop of the local area asked me to serve Forest Home Chapel, the first United Methodist Church of Forest Home in Ithaca.
Right.
And it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah. And the Cornell community, of course, is right, is a neighbor of yours there. Yeah. And Amy Fleming is the coordinator of the Justice and Peace Resource Center.
Yes.
Which provides resources to churches, not just in the Catholic traditions, but all across the board.
And one of the things I try to do is connect groups. You know, we are very fortunate in this area to have several groups working on different issues of peace. We have Veterans for Peace, we have Teachers for Peace, we have Peace Action, and we have the Catholic Peace Community. And so my thought many years ago was we should be working closer together. We should, and not reinventing the wheel, not duplicating efforts. And certainly when 3 or 4 or more of us are gathered, it always was much more meaningful and powerful when we had great groups of people getting together talking about the issues.
The word peace itself, or peacemaking, we often think of it in terms of maybe right now the rockets being sent by North Korea into the sea to threaten South Korea. But peace is also related to the issues in the family, between husband and wife, certainly within the divisions that happen in churches. I mean, peacemaking is something that has something to do with my own sense of serenity and security as a person of faith. So peacemaking on all these different areas, to bring these groups together and to find strength and commonality sounds like quite an assignment for you.
Yeah, one of the quotes I used to like to use when I was doing my classes was, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. So let it begin with me.
Yeah. I'm often thinking too, as people respond to issues of peace and justice, about the term bleeding heart liberal. Are there not bleeding heart moderates and bleeding heart conservatives too? And doesn't the term bleeding heart come from the bleeding heart of Jesus? Is that right?
I don't know the source
so.
of it, but it makes sense.
That deep compassion welling up. And so
the bleeding heart is a very powerful symbol. And Parker Palmer talks about creating politics that is worthy of the human spirit. And he writes a great deal about the heart. And heart has so many images connected with it through the years. The interesting thing is that why do people relate liberal to the bleeding heart, and not conservative or other wild
words.
pieces of words.
Yeah.
And I think that clearly I go back to the issue of getting facts, developing an ability to discern what to do with those facts based on a set of values. And certainly in the Christian tradition, we look at Jesus, his life, his death on the cross, his resurrection, showing the power of God to overcome the most heinous of evil acts in history. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that overcoming those evil acts takes much longer than we would like it to be.
Yeah.
You look at racism and you think back in the history of our country, and John Woolman, the Quaker who stood up to slavery and challenged it in a very significant way in the 18th century. And to realize that some Christians then had not the ability to be discerning about the value of those human beings who were enslaved by others. And I just fear that we today, as a society and maybe as individuals, and I'm sorry to say in some of the churches, don't realize the value of the people who live in poverty or the child who is hungry. I mean, you had some statistics earlier that you were talking with us about.
Well, Broome County's the new list of statistics just came out, and 17.8% is the poverty rate in Broome County. In Binghamton, the sad news is that 1 out of 2 children live in poverty. In New York State,
50% of the children in New York State.
Well, no, that's just Binghamton.
In Binghamton.
In New York State, it's children and senior citizens. 1 out of 5 live in poverty. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about cutting Social Security, not giving any, trying to corporatize Social Security, which would be a major disaster. And so what did Jesus ask of us? To take care of the poor and the vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And who are more vulnerable than our children and our seniors?
Sure. And you look at the whole issue, when you look at those statistics, the impact of a living wage, for instance, and the big fight now in New York State, one that was, I think, passed in California just recently, $15 an hour. What impact that would have upon a family, a working poor family, for instance. And when you look at, and we talk about the institutional resistance to moderate distribution of wealth, that's where we are facing some major problems, and it comes back to person, people, and institutions all in that same issue.
I was interested, you brought up the term discernment. We're really good at judging. I mean, we're one of my great sins that I can confess here in the confessional of television is I am very judgmental. But there's a difference between being judgmental and being discerning. Judgmental is bad. Discerning is good. Discerning is just being aware and making good decisions. Looking at the options and then kind of trying to fall down on the side of the preaching of Jesus for the outcast and for the widows and orphans, traditionally even in the Old Testament.
And it's so important, I think, because true humility becomes a very, very important character of the person working in social justice. I mean, it's true important for all people, but certainly it's true, very, very important for one who's committed to social justice. Gathering facts, being discerning, but being humble enough to know that you may not have the right answer all the time, that you're still willing to work with other people. And I mentioned John Woolman, who's one of my heroes of the 18th century, who really led the Quakers to fight slavery when many, in the 1750s, I think, when many people in this country waited much longer to get rid of slavery. And his approach, it seemed to me, to hit the issue head on, but he was very humble in his approach, and seemed to win many people over that. And I've had a couple, I can't remember all the names of the people who said his journal was probably the most significant book that this person or these persons had read other than the Bible, because he kept track of what his thinking was. And I do think that educational experience in the church, in public schools, private schools, we really have to teach people not only to get the facts, but to be discerning, to be humble about, and that's very difficult sometimes.
Well, sure, if you think of humility as looking at not considering yourself more important than the least of the people in your neighborhood, and Jesus has defined neighborhood as being very, very broad. We only have a couple of minutes left, and Amy, I want to see how people can get in touch with you for resources. Where can we find you?
I have an office at Catholic Charities. I'm there on Mondays and Thursdays, and the phone number is 729-9166.
729-9166.
And not only do I provide resources, I do media work for some of the peace groups, and also I like to talk to people and connect them. One of the other things we discovered was that a lot of people come into social justice when it affects them personally, you know?
Sure.
And so if you have an issue that you would like to talk to someone about, I probably know the people you can talk to. If you have an interest that's a passion of yours that you would like to know which of these peace groups are working on, I would be happy to connect you with them. And so I'd be very happy to be very busy with phone calls next
So
week.
your office, the Justice and Peace Resource Center is
at Catholic Charities
on Main Street.
232 Main Street.
In Binghamton.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being with us. Fred Brooks, retired United Methodist minister, and also Amy Fleming, who is the resource, the coordinator of the Justice and Peace Resource Center. Good discussion. We're going to have to continue this again because we just run out of time, or there's so much more we could have talked about. Thank you for joining us for the Encounter program. We'll be back again next week at the same time. I'm Jeff Kellam, hoping that in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and with yourself.